Welcome to part 10 of the Industrial Revolution. Now we're going to talk about socialism. Now, as I said, if Romanticism is passion with no plan, early socialism was a plan with no passion. Now, socialism, like Romanticism and liberalism, is another loaded term in the modern lexicon, right? It can be argued that even early human societies practiced some form of socialism, ideas of like property in common or working for the good of the community, right? But early socialist writers emerged from a coherent 19th century philosophy that was born out of the Industrial Revolution, right? They agreed with the classical liberals that everybody should have the vote and that there should be freedom of the press. But like John Stuart Mill and the utilitarianism, they also argued that such amenities are useless if the voters or readers are illiterate and miserable. So early socialists take this further and suggest a radical solution. Okay, they argue that it was neither natural or fair for only 1% of the population to own 35% of the wealth, including land and natural resources. So socialists begin to advocate for common ownership of natural resources and means of production and distribution, right? That means factories, transportation companies, and so on. They didn't want to take away your personal possessions. They just want to take away the large things that are necessary for a functioning society, right? The earliest advocates of socialism were so optimistic about the persuasiveness of this logic that it made just such total sense that they referred to themselves as utopian socialists, right? The utopian socialists hope to persuade the upper and middle classes to relinquish ownership of their natural resources willingly, but if not, have it done through government intervention, right? Now, Count Henri de Saint-Simon is often credited as being the originator of socialism. He saw it as a natural outgrowth of Christianity. In his book, The New Christianity, published in 1825, the Count urged that the state should organize common exploitation of resources as directed by scientists and intellectuals, right? Industrialization could be good if it's modeled around Christian principles. He also originated that phrase that we well know among socialist circles and communist circles for that matter as well, from each according to his ability to each according to his work, right? Charles Fourier believed that social harmony would result if society were organized into small, self-sufficient communities called phalanges, taken from the word phalanx, and yeah, phalanges, I know we refer to those as fingers now, right? Robert Owen wanted to reorganize society as well, but he wanted factory owners to do it themselves and saying that, hey, it's in your own best interest to do this. Robert Owen was a self-made man, right? He purchased a cotton mills in New Lanark, Scotland in 1799. But he was appalled by the conditions of workers, so he resolved to give them decent working hours and decent conditions and housing and schools, hospitals, and churches. In other words, form a community that provided the needs of the worker and proved to be productive and profitable. So in 1813, Robert Owen is going to publish a book called A New View of Society, and where he urged the establishment of self-sufficient factory communities. Okay, several Owenite communities will then be established based on this model, including Owen's own greatest experiment, a 20,000-acre settlement in New Harmony, Indiana. Now, most of the Owenite communities failed as a result of mismanagement or just hostility from the outside world. And ultimately, this utopian dream of the factory owners could be persuaded to share the wealth was pretty misguided. Matter of fact, it was exactly that, utopian. So if the factory owners are not going to give up these resources willingly, the socialists, you'll see, become a little bit more revolutionary. People like Louis Blanc, for example, is going to argue that workers need to seek more justice in society through revolutionary action. Probably the two most famous of these revolutionary socialists are Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, right? they systematized the call for revolutionary action, saying it's rooted in history. Now, both of these men started off as fairly typical 19th century middle class intellectuals. Engels was the son of a wealthy German factory owner, right? He was shocked when he went to examine one of the family factories in Manchester, England, so much so, in fact, that he wrote a book on it called The Conditions of the Working Class in England, and where he called Manchester the shock city of the industrial age, right? So he's developing these ideas, but he didn't really have any idea what to do or how to form these until he met Karl Marx in 1843. When he met Karl Marx, they began developing these ideas of radical socialism in 1848 with the publication of the Communist Manifesto, right? Over the next 35 years, they'll continue to develop these ideas until they finally reach the crescendo, if you will, with their book, their 3-volume series called Das Kapital. Now, Das Kapital, at the time, like I said, it's 3 volumes. When Karl Marx died in 1883, only one of the 3 were published. The other 2 will be published after his death. But in these works, they developed the economic and material interpretation of history and how it applies to their ideas, right? According to Marx and Engels, the most important thing about society is its basic structure, and how and why it organizes itself depends solely on the appropriation of resources, the material basis of life, right? Marx and Engels then say that all human activity then is a story of a struggle for material resources. Economical structure is key. Because there's only a finite amount of money and material in the world, then that means the story of human history and human existence is based on the idea of class struggle. So history is about the struggle between the haves and the have-not, right? That's the basis for class struggle. Industrialization is only the latest in the steps of class struggle, according to Marx and Engels, right? One in which the factory owners appear to have won, right? Because the real story of history is about class war, and because the factory owners have most of the advantages, because they have the wealth, they have the political power, and so on, the factory owners will never follow the suit of Robert Owens, right? And there will be no Owenite revolution, right? In order for the workers to actually get that portion of the material, they're going to have to do it through revolution of their own, right? But revolution is impossible as long as the workers lack a class conscience to realize that they're even in this class war. This is what Marx and Engels is arguing. And they'll say religion and nationalism and even trade unions are really just smoke screens that are created by factory owners and their predecessors and their allies in order to fool workers into submissiveness, right? Loyalty based on some kind of deferred reward or patriotism or some other kind of incremental progress, right? Religion. It gives clear rules of conduct, it gives charity, it promises a heavenly reward for good, but it also preaches obedience. Nationalism and patriotism promotes loyalty and solidarity and inspires conflict, but the conflict's between nationals and not classes. Government reforms and trade unions give the appearance of being there to help the workers, but all gains are always minimal, right? And all this is set to, according to Marx and Engels, to deter the workers from their revolution. Marx and Engels argue that after the revolution, a classless society will ensue. All workers will work in accordance to their abilities and will be rewarded according to their needs. Because all would have the necessary materials for the conditions of life, all would be content, and the class struggle would cease, right? And because everyone would now be on their best behavior, after a brief interval to set everything up, the state itself, government, would wither away. There would be no need for it. And the result would be a workers' paradise, and indeed a paradise for all. Now, Marx and Engels were arguing that basic socialism was too utopian, right? Utopian, by the way, is from Thomas More's book, Utopia, which is from 2 Greek words, utopia, which means no place or nowhere. And I'll tell you right now, this is really utopian when you really look at it. The utopianism of the Marx and Engels ideas, the Marxist system, can really be seen when we take a look at its flaws, right? First of all, they define humans and human happiness far too narrowly. They deny things like spirituality and altruistic impulses, right? And they also underestimate just human greed and materialism and competitiveness, right? We don't revolt against the factory owner in part because we someday hope to be the factory owner, right? We've bought into that capitalistic promise that we can achieve these goals. And it's really not realistic to think that a person is going to give up their own materialism and their competitiveness, right? But Marxism and the Marxist system is still important because it does point out for the first time how important economics is to history. Marx and Engels' critique of capitalism is very powerful and it's often very difficult to answer to. But for Marx and Engels, at least during their lifetime, they failed to achieve that workers' revolution that they had hoped to see. It doesn't mean it's going to go away entirely. There'll be other versions of this that are going to pop up and actually be tried even as forms of government.